What happens to us when we open a book? When we read the pages of a great author who can take us into a whole new world, who can help us escape the mundane that seems to surround us. When we open a book, the world of imagination becomes real to us. It's amazing what can happen when we open a book. Hi everyone, welcome to my new program called Open a Book. And the reason why I want to start doing this is because I have always loved to read. However, I don't always have the time for it. Before I had Tavin, who has occupied so much of my time, and the noise level occupies every ounce of space every single day, it's hard for me to sit down with quiet time and just read. When I do find time to read, I am completely and utterly engrossed, and I find it hard to tear myself away. This year, I have vowed to read the classics. Now, this is quite an undertaking, and I have to admit that there are a couple people who have influenced this in my life, and one of them is a fellow YouTuber, Lucy the Reader. Please check out her channel because she is such an amazing young woman. She is very well spoken, highly educated, and really knows literature. She's very, very young, but really articulates a love for books that passed on to me. There are just some people in this world who can influence you and motivate you to get back into the very things that you love. So I want to thank Lucy the Reader for putting that love of books back in me. I have never stopped loving books. However, as I said, I don't really always get a chance to read as often as I would like. So it's hard for me sometimes to just sit down and read. But I have dedicated this year to sit down and make sure that I am reading, not only for myself, but for Tavin, so that he can start developing a love for books too. Tavin is an incredible reader. He reads at a 12th grade level, if not at an adult level, college level. He spells all the time. However, he finds it very hard to just sit down and just read. It's not something he loves to do, which is sad for me because I am that kind of person. So I want to develop a love for him, for books. I want him to know the joy of reading, that experience of immersing yourself into a whole new world that just opens up the imagination and your mind to so many new and wonderful things and takes you on experiences and journeys that you could never have in your daily routine life. I am starting out this year reading the classics. Before I start talking about some of the classics that I'm going to be reading, and one of the best classics I'm reading so far right now, I am reading it and I'm super excited about it. That is a totally different video that's coming up next. I'll give you a little hint. I am reading the classic Beauty and the Beast. And I'm reading the classic in a whole new way. And I am really excited to share that with you in my next video. However, if we're going to start talking about literature and opening a book, I want to talk about the very first influential book that everyone should read. Despite your religious affiliation, despite whether you are a Christian or you are secular or an atheist, it doesn't matter. One of the most influential pieces of literature that most college professors say everyone should read in their lifetime is the Bible. That's quite an endeavor. I don't know if you know, the Bible has very, very thin sheets of paper. You can almost see through them, okay? And there's pages, thousands of pages. And so taking on the Bible can be quite frightening, to say the least. However, there are a lot of programs out there today where you can read the Bible in a year. But one of my favorite programs was called Be 90. And it's where you can read the Bible in 90 days. This was one of the most powerful things I have ever done in my life. And one of the Bibles that I used to read the Bible in 90 days was this tiny little edition of the Message. A lot of people will tell you the King James Version. If you're not reading the King James Version, you're going to hell. Please believe me when I tell you that that is not true. A lot of people think that that's the purest form of the Bible. However, I highly, highly disagree with that theory and that notion. And I don't care what you say in the comments below if you believe otherwise. Nothing that you say will convince me that the King James Version is the purest version. The reason for that is because the Bible had been translated numerous times before the King James Version ever came into existence. The King James Version is really written in a format of Old English. Ye, thou, thee, and all the ests at the end of the words. That doesn't make it pure. Because of new technology and new understanding of Hebrew and Latin and Greek, we have a better understanding today of the original documents that have been found. So there are scholars today who study the Bible and translate it almost verbatim. They try to get as close as they possibly can. One of those versions to me, and a lot of people may disagree, is the Message Bible. The reason why I like the Message Bible, it is written in modern language. Another one of my favorite versions is The Voice. This was written as if it was a screenplay. Really quite fantastic. I really do love this version a lot. It's very reader friendly, as is the Message. But if you're used to traditional Bible verses, you are going to be really confused by this and go, where's my original Bible verses? Like, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You are not going to find that in the Message Bible. Please understand that. Or, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You are not going to get that in here. Let me go ahead and explain to you what I'm saying. I'm actually going to look up the verse, Psalm 23, because everybody knows that psalm, right? Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. Listen to those pages. I just love the sound of Bible pages. Now here's the difference. The Message version reads like this, Psalm 23. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Now, I love that because it is still very poetic. Remember, King David was writing songs like some of the great poets that we read today. David was a great poet, as was his son Solomon, as was the prophet Jeremiah. So reading the Psalms is reading poetry. I am a Christian. My take on reading the Bible is entirely different on somebody else's take who is going to read this for literature purposes. Literature. Yes, this is literature, but it's also history. Let me explain to you a little bit about that. What I love about the Bible is that it's broken up into historical pieces, poetry. There's an epic poem called Job. Then the Bible also consists of what we call historical events, which are the Kings and the Chronicles. It tells the story of how Israel became into existence in the first place and all the kings throughout the time. It's all documented here. This is proof that this really did happen. And a lot of people want to say, the Bible isn't true. There's no truth in it whatsoever. The book of Kings and Chronicles is actually true stories. That's one of the things about literature. It has been around since the beginning of time. The only thing that's different today is that it's written down. At the beginning of time, literature was something that you told to your friends, to your families. It was stories that you passed down generation to generation. And eventually people began to write them down, like Moses did in the first 5 books of the Bible. Then we get historical accounts, like I said, of Kings and Chronicles. It tells the history. Daniel tells the history. Nehemiah tells the history. Ezra tells the history. Esther tells the history. So to say that it's not a historical book is not true. Because even when we get into the New Testament, a lot of people don't deny that Jesus was real. We know that. He is a real person. Nobody on the planet denies that Jesus was real. The New Testament gives us actual eyewitness accounts of his ministry. That's amazing. There is not a lot of eyewitness accounts from ancient times that we still have, that is being passed down and passed down generation after generation. Now you may think, what's so great about the Bible? Well, I'll tell you what's so great about the Bible. It has been the #1 best-selling book for decades. Decades. Now, why do I say that? Well, here's proof. How many of you have one Bible? How many of you have more Bibles? I have several different versions of the Bible. I like to cross-reference, but I also like a little different flavor. I like to read the scripture a little bit different. Sometimes I want to hear the New King James Version, which takes out the these and thys and puts the you and me in there instead. This book here is the New Living Translation, which I love. Now, this book is something very special I want to show you because Bible journaling has become a new thing. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of the illustrated classics that I'm really getting into. And one of the things that got me into this was learning about the illustrated Bible, which was called the Illuminated Bible. It's one of the very first artworks that ever became into existence besides cave art that we are aware of. So here's the story of Ezra. As you can see, this is one of these creative journaling Bibles. This is called Inspire. And my best friend sent me this Bible, and I love it because I love to color in my Bible. I love to do lots of artwork in my Bible. So you'll see here the epic poem of Job, and you'll see that you're able to do some coloring. It already has all the artwork in it for you, so you can just color it. And it goes back to that idea of the illuminated Bibles that were so incredibly beautiful and translated by the monks by hand. Literature is in this book. It contains so much information. As I said before, if you want to know about the history of Israel and the history of our beginnings, this is where you want to start. Now, a lot of people get very frustrated with it. They want to start judging God. I'm going to ask you to put that aside for a while, especially if you're not a Christian. Put all your judgments, your preconceived judgments about God, just throw them to the wayside so that you can really just engross yourself in the stories. To us, these are stories, but they're true stories. They're true accounts for Christians. For you, it may not be a true account. That's okay, because what you're doing is you're trying to read this from a literary standpoint, and college professors recommend that you do so because it will heighten your awareness of the world around you. It will give you great insight into literature itself. Again, it is quite an undertaking. I'm not going to lie. There is a lot of pages. The pages are just so delicate. Don't you love the sound of a Bible? I love to journal in my Bible, as I said before, and this is kind of how it started. And I'll show you my Psalms page because I really love the Psalms. It's one of my most favorite books. Psalms just really is such a great example of great poetry. A lot of people are thinking, oh, the Bible is supposed to be this feel-good book. No. Please get that out of your head. The Bible is not a feel-good book. It hurts to read the Bible. There are a lot of things in there that a lot of people will say, God, he's so mean. You may see that. And if you can't get past that part of the story that you're reading, you need to continue on, because then you will start to see the love and mercy of God rather than the vindictiveness that a lot of people think is God. If you can move past all of that and stop judging the characters, then I think you will find that maybe God is the antagonist, but also the protagonist. He is not only the villain, but the hero. And a lot of people think he is the villain. He's also our hero. He's also our savior. Now, David, the psalmist, knew that better than anybody. That's what's so great about this book. Let me tell you, this isn't a feel-good book. The story, the epic poem of Job, is one of the most heartbreaking stories about God and how angry Job is at his lot in life, and how he finally gets an audience with God after demanding it over and over again. And the book of Psalms by David, they are heartbreaking. They are so powerful. They're not just uplifting poems. They tell the heartbreak of David's loss, of David's sorrow, of David's disbelief and why God was doing some of the things that were happening into his life, why he was suffering so, why he was on the run, why he was being hunted down by King Saul. Oh my gosh, the Psalms are all those stories. He was a poet, and he put his entire life story in the book of Psalms. And if you want to know David, that's the way to find out who David was. Even though his story is in Samuel 1 and 2. That's his story, though. That's his beginning. That's from someone else's perspective. The book of Psalms is David's own words, his own pain, his own sorrow, his own joy, his own greatness, his own weaknesses. He tells those stories in songs like a lot of songwriters do today. And then the New Testament tells us the story of Jesus, the Messiah. Many people don't believe that Jesus was the Savior of the world. If that's you, that's okay. Don't read it from that perspective. Try to read it from the perspective of the historical account of Jesus, because it is true. These people who wrote the story, James, Matthew, Luke, John, Peter, Paul, they all experienced Jesus in one way or another. You may not believe it, but that is what happened to them. It's their story. If you're one of those people who like to read on your tablet or your phone, YouVersion is just one of the best apps because you can get just about any Bible translation in the world. Nothing's really been lost in translation. That's very true. The context, the reality, the history has not been lost through translation. Some words have changed in different versions. Again, I'll read from the Voice, Psalm 23 this time, and you'll see how Psalm 23 sounds from this perspective. The Eternal is my shepherd. He cares for me always. He provides me rest in rich green fields beside streams of refreshing water. He soothes my fears. He makes me whole again, steering me off worn, hard paths to roads where truth and righteousness echo his name. I love this version very much. And if you can't tell, I love to write in my Bible. Take it in. Take notes. Write what you're feeling. One of the things that I love so much is that I love to take notes, but I like to write little things that remind me, like maybe of my father or what it means to be a father. Here I drew Wicked Road and Heartbreak, just talking about some of the heartbreak in Proverbs. Proverbs written by King Solomon. Seriously, so much of our lives are based on Proverbs. The Bible is not just one book. The Bible consists of 66 different books. And if you want to look at it that way and read 66 different books, that's a great way of looking at it too and breaking it down. They're broken down into sections. The first section is called the Pentateuch, which was written by Moses. They are the first 5 chapters of the Bible, which are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Then we go into more of the historical accounts of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Then we go into the book of poetries, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, one of so beautiful for relationships. If you are in a romantic relationship, Song of Songs is the way to go as well. Very beautiful book of love poetry. Then we get into the book of prophets. And a lot of these prophets, actually, their prophecies came true for Israel. And some of these prophecies are for our modern day, and some of them are actually unfolding before our eyes today, if you don't know that. Jeremiah. Lamentations is kind of a book of poetry by Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a prophet who didn't want to be a prophet. He was called by God, but hated being a prophet so much that he wrote the book of Lamentations, talking about how absolutely awful it was to be a prophet. Very good book. Highly recommend it. Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, which is a historical account, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. These are really great prophets, but they're beautiful books. The book of Hosea is one of my favorite stories. He was a prophet that was told by God to marry a prostitute who would end up leaving him. That's about all I'm going to tell you of that story, because I think it's one of the most powerful stories in the Bible about who we are, not just the Israelites, because we can sit and judge and go, gosh, those Israelites, whoo, what was God doing? How much patience did he have with these people? But the reality is that as a Christian, we are God's people, and we still are like that. And if you read it from a secular viewpoint, you can actually see yourself in these stories as well. And the book of Hosea shows us the mercy of God. Now, you may not think, how merciful is God to have a man marry a prostitute who's going to end up leaving him and breaking his heart. But you will see the compassion of God. I'm not going to give you the ending because I highly recommend that you read this story, because it is really incredibly powerful. And you might get angry with God during this story. In fact, you will get angry with God. But you have to read the whole thing so that you can find out who God really is. Instead of judging him as the evil villain of the story, you will find out that God is the most merciful, compassionate, loving God that we could ever hope for. So again, if you're starting literature, I highly recommend reading the Bible as a piece of literature. I hope you enjoy your reading. Go online, try to find some reading plans. I do not recommend the reading plans that break up the Bible into different portions per day, meaning some yearly plans will break up the Old Testament includes some of the New Testament, includes some of the Psalms and some of the Proverbs. The problem with that is that you'll only read 2 or 3 lines from the Psalms and you won't read the rest of it until the very next day. That's just not right for me. To me, if you're going to read a Psalm, you need to read the whole thing. And you can read this book in different formats. You don't have to read it from cover to cover. You can pick and choose whatever book you want to start with. If you're not interested in reading the Bible itself, there's also a novel called The Book of God. Let me just read a little bit from this book. Once more, the man named Moses stood before the Lord upon the mountain, wrapped in darkness, praying, "Alas, the people have sinned exceedingly, graven images, gods of gold, petty deities, and they think they can control. They have sinned grievously." Slowly, Moses lifted his blind face. Moses began to wring his hands. "Remember the promises which you swore unto our fathers, to make of their descendants a great nation, and to give them Canaan as their inheritance forever." There was silence in the universe. Then the sound of the mountain was somewhat softened. "They may go. Tell that stiff-necked people they may go to the land I promised, but they go alone." Moses, Moses. All thunder ceased. The darkness lightened. And the Lord said, "Moses, this very thing which you have spoken, I will do it, for you have found favor in my sight." So as you can see, the book of God is written more in the terms of a novel, where you get a little bit more of the metaphors, you get a little bit more of the scenery and a backdrop that you don't really get in the Bible, because the Bible was written more for historical terms. It was written to just give the details, tell it like it is. There wasn't a whole lot of backdrop involved where you can actually feel yourself in the story. So again, if you're looking for more of a story type, this is the way to go as well. But I highly recommend that you do try to endeavor the Bible, the real Bible. Give it a try. Start with the Psalms, start with the New Testament, start with Job. Job is very powerful. And if you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling in a place where you don't feel understood, go to the Psalms. I promise you, even if you're not a believer, you will find hope in the Psalm. Always open a book. Once a day at least. Try to find a way to escape into a good novel. Open a book.